The Customs Act 1962 has 17 chapters and 161 sections. In this topic, I have decided to break it up into three parts. Part 1 will be from chapter 1 to 5, part 2 from chapter 6 to 10, and part 3 from chapter 11 to chapter 17. Hello everyone, my name is Viren Dayal. I'm a custom broker and a logistics skill certified trainer in customs law, applied rules and regulations.
For latest updates, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon.
The topic today is what are the contents of the Customs Act, when did it origin, what were the previous legislation in force, and why do I subscribe to a customs law manual for the purpose of learning. The Customs Act has 17 chapters and each chapter has got its importance. Let us discuss in detail what each chapter has and what are the underlying provisions in those chapters. Before I begin, let me start with the fact that recently the Customs Act completed 60 years of its implementation in India. The Customs Act was enacted as an act of parliament on 13th December 1962 and came into force on 1st of February 1963. Before the enactment of Customs Act, India had 4 acts which were in force and they were made during the time the British ruled over India. So the Sea Customs Act of 1878, the Inland Bonded Warehouse Act of 1896, the Land Customs Act of 1924, and the Aircraft Act of 1934 were in force prior to enactment of the Customs Act 1962. Therefore, the provisions of all the 4 acts were subsumed into one single statute, and that is the Customs Act, and the acts were repealed, excepting for the Aircraft Act, where only Section 16 was repealed, and thus started the journey of the Indian Customs Act 1962. The Customs Act is a single statute with 17 chapters and 161 sections. And the Act tries to achieve a lot of objectives, and to carry out its purpose has made subordinate legislation, various rules and regulations which aid the Customs Act to carry out its purpose. Let us now study what is there chapter-wise in the Customs Act 1962. As always, the Act begins with introduction, and similarly, the Customs Act began with introduction that it will be in force throughout India. And in 2018, it further amended Section 1 that it will also be applicable or will extend where any offences are committed under the Customs Act or any law for the time being in force, including the rules and regulations. So the government of India enacted the Fugitives and Economic Offenders rules, and accordingly a person who has committed an offence under the Customs Act can be tried under the provision of this Act even elsewhere, that is outside India. Chapter 2 has 4 sections, 3, 4, 5 and 6, which mainly talk about how different officers will be appointed, what will be their roles and their responsibilities and the powers entrusted to them by the board. This talks about officers of customs and by what name they will be called. Chapter 3 has 3 sections, 7, 8 and 9, and these sections pertain to the power given to the board, that is CBIC, to appoint physical topography or fixed areas known as customs spot, customs airport, land customs station, inland container depot, air freight station, foreign post office, international courier terminal. These can be appointed under Section 7 of the Customs Act by the board. Upon doing so, various officers of customs are appointed at various ports, airports, ICDs and so on to carry out the purpose of this Act. Accordingly, Section 8 under delegated legislation has given power to the Principal Commissioner or Commissioner to define the area, that is the customs area where import and export activity take place. It is necessary to define the customs area so that the goods can come at only those designated areas and not elsewhere, and therefore we prevent smuggling by designating a certain place as a custom area or a custom station and so on. Section 9 has been omitted, and section 10 talks about boarding stations, which mainly pertain to ocean going vessels. Chapter 4 is prohibitions. This has one section, section 11, and it talks about the rights of right holders such as patents, trademarks, copyrights, geographical indications, and the protection given under the Customs Act in case of infringement, besides other provisions which are there in section 11. So basically, section 11 acts like a watchdog to the government and ensures that no import or export will take place if the goods are prohibited, and if they are restricted, they will be allowed only if the conditions for imports or exports are fulfilled. The next chapter, chapter 4A, 4B, and 4C, were enacted on 3rd of January 1969 to beat the smuggler in the international market by making provisions for illegal import of goods and export of goods, known as notified goods and specified goods. India during those times, that is 1969, was a very watertight economy and a very controlled economy as compared to what it is right now. And these chapters talked about how certain notified goods and specified goods should be kept, intimation of the place of import, how they can be transferred from one person to another. So this was done only to harass the smuggler with so many regulatory provisions. And these chapters, chapter 4A, 4B, and 4C, currently are not very important because most of the items are not under the purview of notified goods and specified goods or illegal import or illegal export. Chapter 5 talks about levy and exemption from duties of customs. According to me, this particular chapter, chapter 5, is the heart and soul of the Customs Act because it talks about the constitutional decree, or that taxation is a sovereign function. In the Indian Constitution, the government will collect duties of customs at the time of import and export of goods. Section 12, particularly in this chapter, is known as the charging section and says that the duties will be collected at the time of imports and exports as per the rates in the Customs Tariff Act 1975 or any other law for the time being in force. Interestingly, section 12 talks about levy. So the constitutional provision of collecting duty is as per section 12, and the basic custom duty, which is in the first schedule of the Customs Tariff Act, the BCD, what we popularly refer to, is that levy which is under section 12, and the other types of duties of customs are under the Customs Tariff Act 1975. Besides levy, this particular chapter has various other topics such as refunds in case excess duty has been paid or recovery in case less duty has been paid. This chapter also talks about how assessment should be done to collect duties and what are the procedures for assessment of goods under the Customs Act. All in all, this chapter is important because it talks about levy of duty on goods which are imported into India and exported from India. The next chapter, chapter 5A, has two sections, section 28C and 28D, and they mainly pertain to the provisions of section 27, which is refund of duties or rather claim for refund of duties when the goods are imported into India, and the provisions of unjust enrichment which are enshrined in section 27 convey that under section 28C and 28D, the person claiming refund of duty will prominently state in every invoice the price on which the duty has been calculated and so on. A new chapter, chapter 5AA, was introduced in the Finance Act of 2020, administration of rules of origin under trade agreements. And under these rules, the Carota rules, the onus is on the importer and the exporter to prove that preferential duty has been correctly and legally taken and becomes a punishable offense if it is found otherwise. The next chapter, chapter 5B, was a concept introduced in 1999, that is advance rulings. The advance rulings helps the importer exporter to get a ruling before the commencement of any economic activity, that is import and export into India, and can help the importer or the exporter to get a ruling in advance on the duties of customs, valuation principles, rules of origin, and so on. This is the end of part 1.
For detailed learning of all logistics subjects, visit www.logiveda.com.